The prairie dust swirled around Katherine Neville's wedding dress as she stood frozen in the doorway of the small country church, watching her carefully planned future unravel like the delicate lace now hanging in tatters from her sleeve. It was 1878 in the wild western territory of Wyoming, and Katherine's wedding day the culmination of a 6-month courtship with the region's most successful cattle baron was rapidly disintegrating before her eyes. "Miss Katherine, we can fix this," whispered her maid nervously, eyeing the damaged lace that had caught on a rough-hewn nail as Katherine had entered the church. The intricate Belgian lace had been her mother's, shipped all the way from Boston for this occasion, and now it hung in ruins, the beautiful pattern destroyed. Katherine touched the torn fabric with trembling fingers. "It took my mother 3 years to create this pattern. This was all I had left of her." The tears began to fall, slow at first, then in earnest as she retreated from the church doorway. Inside, 50 guests waited, including her soon-to-be husband, Frederick Williams, a man 20 years her senior who owned half the cattle in the territory. The match had been arranged by Katherine's father before his death last winter, a final attempt to secure his daughter's future in the unforgiving western landscape. "I can't go in like this," Katherine whispered, gathering her skirts. "I just need a moment." She turned and fled, ignoring the startled calls from behind her. The small town of Promise Creek wasn't large enough to offer many hiding places, but Katherine found herself drawn to the livery stable at the edge of town. It was quiet there, away from the prying eyes and the expectations. She slipped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and horses. "Miss, are you all right?" Katherine startled, hastily wiping tears from her cheeks as she looked up to see a tall figure emerge from one of the stalls. Yates McAllister stood before her, his hat respectfully removed to reveal sun-bronzed hair that fell just past his collar. At 26, he was the youngest of the respected McAllister brothers, who ran the largest horse ranch in the territory. "Mr. McAllister," Katherine acknowledged, trying to regain her composure. "I'm perfectly fine, just needed a moment of air before the ceremony." Yates's gaze fell to the torn lace on her sleeve, then back to her tear-stained face. "Doesn't look like perfectly fine to me, Miss Neville." Katherine's practiced poise crumbled. "It's ruined," she said, holding up the torn lace. "My mother's lace, the only thing I had left of her." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Instead of offering empty platitudes, Yates set his hat aside and approached carefully, as he might a spooked colt. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the torn fabric. Confused, Katherine extended her arm. His calloused fingers were surprisingly gentle as they examined the damage. "I might be able to help," he said softly. "Been mending my own things since I was 12. A man alone on the range learns to be handy with a needle. "You can sew." Katherine couldn't hide her surprise. A smile tugged at the corner of Yates's mouth. "Don't sound so shocked, Miss Neville. Cowboys do more than just rope cattle and shoot bottles." Before Katherine could respond, the stable door creaked open and her maid, Betsy, rushed in. "Miss Katherine, everyone's waiting. Mr. Williams is getting anxious." Katherine glanced desperately at Yates, who seemed to understand her silent plea. "Give us 15 minutes, he told Betsy with quiet authority. "Tell Mr. Williams the bride is attending to a matter of importance. She'll be there shortly." Betsy hesitated, then nodded and hurried away. "Now," Yates said, turning back to Katherine, "let me see what I can do." From his saddlebag, he produced a small kit containing needles and threads of various colors. "You carry sewing supplies?" Katherine asked, genuinely curious as she watched him select a fine needle. "Like I said, a man alone needs to be self-sufficient." He found a thread that matched the cream color of her lace. "My mother taught all us boys before she passed. Said a man who couldn't mend his own clothes wasn't much use to anyone, least of all himself." As he worked, Katherine studied his face, the concentration in his blue eyes, the furrow between his brows, the way he occasionally bit his lower lip. She'd seen Yates McAllister around town for years, but had never truly looked at him before. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. His eyes remained on his work. Because you're crying, Miss Neville, and no bride should cry on her wedding day, not from sadness anyway. His fingers moved with surprising dexterity, weaving the thread through the delicate pattern of the lace. Are you happy, Miss Neville? About marrying Williams. His question was so quiet she almost didn't hear it. Katherine stiffened. Mr. Williams is a respectable man of means. My father arranged the match before he died. That's not what I asked. Katherine fell silent, watching him work. No one had asked her that question before, not even herself. It doesn't matter, she finally said. It's what's expected. Yates looked up then, his eyes meeting hers. It's the only thing that matters. A commotion outside broke the moment. Voices called Katherine's name. Almost done, Yates murmured, making a final stitch. As he tied off the thread, Katherine noticed a wetness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Mr. McAllister, are you? He blinked rapidly. Dust, he said gruffly, but Katherine knew better. She'd seen that look before in her own mirror when she thought about a life stretching endlessly before her, married to a man she respected but did not love. There, he said, clipping the thread with a small knife. It won't hold forever, but it'll get you through today. Katherine examined his work with amazement. The repair was nearly invisible, the pattern restored with such care that only the closest inspection would reveal the damage. How did you had a lot of practice, he said, packing away his sewing kit. My brother Jamie's always tearing his shirts on fences, Mr. McAllister. Katherine began, but the stable door burst open again. There you are. It was Frederick Williams himself, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Katherine, what is the meaning of this? The entire town is waiting. Williams's gaze shifted to Yates, narrowing dangerously. McAllister, what are you doing with my bride? Yates stood, his expression carefully neutral. Just helping the lady with a tear in her dress, Mr. Williams, nothing more. Is this true, Katherine? Williams demanded. Katherine nodded, showing him the mended lace. Mr. McAllister was kind enough to repair my mother's lace when it tore on the church door. Williams's expression softened slightly. Well then, I suppose thanks are in order, McAllister, but we're late for our own wedding. He extended his arm to Katherine. Shall we, my dear? Katherine hesitated, looking back at Yates, who had retreated into the shadows of the stable. Thank you, she said softly. I won't forget your kindness. Be happy, Miss Neville, Yates replied, his voice barely audible. That's all the thanks I need. As Katherine took Frederick's arm, something inside her shifted, a certainty that had been building without her knowledge. In the brief moments with Yates McAllister, she'd felt more seen, more understood than in all the months of her engagement. Frederick, she said, stopping just outside the stable door. I need to speak with you privately. 3 days later, Katherine Neville sat at her father's desk in their modest home, penning a letter to her aunt in Boston. The news of her canceled wedding had spread through Promise Creek like wildfire, and while most of the townsfolk had been scandalized, Katherine had never felt more at peace with a decision. Frederick Williams had been angry at first, but to his credit, he'd listened to her earnest explanation and eventually accepted that a marriage without love would benefit neither of them. He'd left town the following day, returning to his ranch with his dignity mostly intact. A knock at the door interrupted Katherine's thoughts. She opened it to find Yates McAllister standing on her porch, hat in hand. Mr. McAllister, she said, surprised. What brings you here? I heard about the wedding, he said simply. Or rather, the lack of one. Thought I'd check on you. Katherine smiled. Would you like to come in for tea? Over steaming cups in her small parlor, they talked about everything and nothing: his ranch, her father's store which she now managed, the changing seasons. It was the first of many such visits over the coming weeks. By summer's end, the town had nearly forgotten the scandal of the canceled wedding, distracted by new gossip, namely, the frequent visits of Yates McAllister to the Neville General Store. Their courtship was unconventional by Promise Creek standards. Yates would help Katherine close the shop, then they would walk together along the creek, talking until the stars emerged. He told her about growing up with 3 brothers, learning to break horses when he was barely tall enough to reach the stirrups, and the dream of building his own ranch separate from his brothers. She shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her mother's lessons in lace making, and her struggle to find her place in the West after her parents' deaths. On a warm September evening, as they sat by the creek watching fireflies dance above the water, Yates finally spoke of what had been growing between them. "I've loved you for years," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Since the first time you came into town with your father and smiled at me when I helped you down from your wagon. But you were always meant for someone like William, someone established, with means." Katherine reached for his hand. "I was never meant for anyone but myself," she said firmly. "And now I choose you, Yates McAllister, not because of what you have or don't have, but because of who you are." Their first kiss beneath the cottonwood tree by the creek felt like coming home after a long journey, but their path forward wasn't without obstacles. October brought an early snow and with it, unexpected troubles. Katherine's store was struggling. The rail line that had been promised to come through Promise Creek had been rerouted, and without it, the town was slowly dying. Customers dwindled, and Katherine found herself facing the possibility of losing everything her father had built. Yates proposed a solution marriage and a move to his small homestead, where he was establishing his own horse breeding operation separate from his family's ranch. Katherine agreed without hesitation. They would be married on Christmas Day. As winter deepened, Katherine worked tirelessly, selling off the store's inventory and preparing for her new life. She took out her mother's wedding dress again, now a symbol not of obligation but of choice. The lace that Yates had repaired remained strong, a testament to his care and skill. 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck. A midnight fire ravaged the store, destroying most of Katherine's possessions, including the trunk containing her wedding dress. She stood in the smoldering ruins at dawn, heartbroken at this final loss of her parents' legacy. Yates found her there, wrapped his coat around her shoulders, and held her as she wept. "We still have each other," he reminded her. "That's all we need." But Katherine mourned the dress with its precious lace, the last tangible connection to her mother, now reduced to ashes. The day before Christmas Eve, Katherine was helping prepare the small church for their wedding when Betsy arrived with a package. "It's from Mr. McAllister," Betsy said, eyes twinkling. "He said you weren't to open it until tomorrow." Curious, Katherine waited until Christmas Eve, then carefully unwrapped the parcel in the privacy of her room at the boarding house where she'd been staying since the fire. Inside was a dress of simple white muslin, but adorning the sleeves and collar was the most exquisite lace pattern familiar yet new. A note in Yates's bold handwriting accompanied it. "I couldn't save your mother's lace, but I remembered the pattern. Been working on it every night since the fire. It's not as fine as hers, but it was made with love. Every stitch is a promise to you." Katherine traced the delicate pattern with trembling fingers, tears falling freely. Somehow, Yates had recreated her mother's lace pattern from memory, his rough cowboy hands crafting something of extraordinary beauty. The next morning dawned clear and cold, perfect for a Christmas wedding. Katherine stood before the mirror in her room, Betsy helping her into the dress Yates had made. The lace was perhaps not as technically perfect as her mother's had been, but it was infused with such care that it seemed to glow with its own light. The small church was decorated with pine boughs and red berries, filled with the friends who had supported them. But Katherine saw only Yates as she walked down the aisle, his eyes widening at the sight of her in the dress he had created. When she reached him, he touched the lace at her sleeve with wonder. "You're wearing it," he whispered. "How could I not?" she replied. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received." As they exchanged vows, Katherine noticed a wetness in Yates's eyes that matched her own, not from sadness or even dust this time, but from a joy so complete it could only be expressed through tears. Their first months as husband and wife were not easy. The winter of 1879 was harsh, and Yates's small homestead offered few comforts. They lived in a two-room cabin while he worked on building their proper home. Katherine learned to manage a household with limited resources, to cook over an open hearth, and to assist with the horses that were the foundation of their future. But each night, as they lay together beneath thick quilts listening to the wind howl outside, Katherine knew she had made the right choice. In Yates's arms, she had found not just security but passion and partnership. Spring brought new beginnings. The fruit trees Yates had planted blossomed, their new house began to take shape, and the mares in their small herd produced healthy foals that promised future prosperity. Katherine discovered she was with child, due in the fall. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their partially completed home watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold, Yates pulled something from his pocket. "I've been meaning to give you this," he said, placing a small wooden box in her hands. Inside was a handkerchief of fine linen, bordered with lace in the same pattern he had created for her wedding dress. "For happy tears only," he said, placing a hand on her growing belly. "Our child will need to know that some tears come from joy." Katherine leaned against his shoulder. "Where did you learn to make lace? You never told me." Yates was quiet for a moment. "My mother was French, came over with almost nothing but the lace-making skills her grandmother taught her. She made pieces for wealthy ladies in Kansas City to earn extra money when times were hard. Taught me because I was patient enough to learn, unlike my brothers." "You never speak of her," Katherine observed gently. "Lost her when I was 14. Influenza." His voice grew rough. "After she died, I kept making lace pieces in secret, felt like keeping her with me somehow." Katherine touched his face, understanding now why he had wept that day in the stable as he repaired her mother's lace. He too had been remembering someone loved and lost. "Our child will learn," she promised. "Boy or girl, they'll know their grandmother's art." That fall, as the aspen trees turned golden, Katherine gave birth to a daughter they named Eliza Marie, after both their mothers. The birth was difficult, leaving Katherine weak and feverish for days afterward. Yates rarely left her side, caring for both mother and infant with tenderness that moved even the doctor who came from the neighboring town. "Never seen a man so natural with a baby," the doctor remarked. "Most fellows can't wait to escape the birthing room." "Most fellows haven't found what I have," Yates replied simply. By their first wedding anniversary, Katherine had fully recovered, their home was completed, and their horse breeding business was showing promise. Yates's skill with difficult horses had earned him a reputation that brought buyers from as far as Denver. The lace-trimmed handkerchief became something of a family talisman, present at all their milestone moments when their second child, a son, was born 2 years later, when they purchased the adjacent property to expand their ranch, when their first horses won prizes at the territorial fair. Life wasn't without hardships. The drought of 1883 nearly destroyed them, forcing Yates to take work breaking horses for other ranchers while Katherine managed everything at home. The winter of 1885 brought illness that claimed their third child just hours after birth, a loss that left them both shattered. But through it all, they faced each challenge together. The partnership that began with a torn piece of lace in a livery stable grew deeper with each passing year. By 1888, 10 years after their wedding, the McAllister Ranch had become one of the most successful horse breeding operations in Wyoming. Their home was filled with laughter, music, and the constant activity of their 3 surviving children. Katherine had established a small business selling lace pieces crafted using the techniques Yates had taught her, which she had refined and expanded with her own creative touch. On the eve of their 10th anniversary, Yates presented Katherine with a special gift, a framed piece of the original lace from her mother's wedding dress, the very piece he had repaired that fateful day. "You kept it all these years?" Katherine asked, astonished. "Found it in the stable after you left with Williams that day. Couldn't bring myself to throw it away." He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. Thought it might bring me luck. Seems it did. Katherine touched the delicate fabric behind the glass. This little piece of lace changed everything. Not the lace, Yates corrected gently, your courage to choose your own path. That night, as their children slept peacefully and the Wyoming wind sang around their sturdy home, Katherine and Yates stood on their porch under a canopy of stars, just as they had countless times before. Any regrets? Yates asked, his arm around her waist. Katherine thought of the life she might have had as Mrs. Frederick Williams, comfortable perhaps, respected certainly, but without the deep joy she had found with Yates. She thought of the tears she had shed that day in the stable, believing her future was unraveling along with her mother's lace. Not a single one, she answered truthfully. You, Yates smiled, pulling her closer. Only that I waited so long to speak up, could have saved myself years of watching you from afar. We found each other when we were meant to, Katherine said, resting her head against his chest. Not a moment too soon, not a moment too late. As they stood together under the vast Wyoming sky, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here from a torn piece of lace to a life woven together with threads of love, sacrifice, and shared dreams. The elaborate pattern they had created together was far more beautiful than anything she could have imagined that spring day in 1878. In the years that followed, the story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to their children, grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. The tale of the bride who cried over torn lace, and the cowboy who sewed it with thread and tears of his own, became emblematic of their life together, how something broken could be not just mended, but made stronger and more beautiful through care and devotion. Katherine and Yates McAllister would face many more challenges through their long marriage, the changing face of the West as the frontier gave way to progress, economic hardships, the heartbreaks and joys that come with raising a family. But they faced each one together, their bond unbroken, like the finest lace, delicate in appearance but surprisingly, enduringly strong. And on their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, surrounded by their large extended family in the home they had built together, Katherine wore a dress trimmed with lace made by her own hands, inspired by the pattern her mother had created, and Yates had preserved a testament to a love that, like the finest handiwork, had only grown more precious with time.